Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Nexus Live with Colin Cantrell. I'm Keith Smith, both of the Nexus core team. We're going to answer a lot of questions that were provided to us by the community. There were so many questions from the last live that we had. People asked if we could get these questions together and just do a live Q&A with Colin. And so we have Colin over here in Arizona. I'm in Pennsylvania. And I'll start off with first question to kind of break the ice. What'd you eat for breakfast?
I think I had a little bit of hummus and pita chips.
Sounds good. I had cheesesteaks for breakfast. So.
Yeah. Rub it in.
Yeah, I know. Healthy. All right, I got a whole list of questions here. You guys did a great job as a community coming in together, getting all these questions. Some of the questions were variables of each other, so I kind of compounded some of the questions together. So if they're not exactly how you worded them, I apologize. This is the best way we can get it across in the short amount of time we got. So first question I have. Is there an updated source for reviewing the Nexus MDC that you are currently developing and that I may be able to review?
Well, so I guess I should clarify with stating that the Tau framework is the 3DC being developed. So since there's 3 levels of locking in the 3DC and in 3 dimensions, it's activating one after the other. So the first stage is going to be the Tritium level locking, and then Omni Vault level locking is going to be the T trust level locks, and then Obsidian is going to be the actual decentralized mining pool levels. So you'll be able to see that if you keep your eye on the dev branch. You'll see progress of that, and as we get more test nets, there's most likely going to be versions built ahead before release that are going to be testing on our test nets, and they're going to be activating from the actual chain itself on the live network to prove it can be done, and to also set a model for other people to utilize it if they feel that it would be valuable for their networks.
Excellent. Is the Nexus MDC that you're working on able to be forked once it has been fully implemented, or are there too many additional security measures to prevent this?
Well, I mean, in an essence, you could attempt to fork it. I mean, it's going to be fork resistant because some of these issues that we're seeing right now with Bitcoin are, I think, destroying some of the image where we're having Bitcoin Cash and then Bitcoin Gold now with their giant pre-mine. And I think it's causing a lot of problems. So it's not going to be conventional where you have block, and then 2 blocks can fork off like that if one of the rules are violated, because the rules are going to be processed internally by a lot more than just miners. So it's not going to be, miners aren't going to be capable of forking it. Miners actually aren't going to set the rules. They're just going to weight the chain data. It's the transaction nodes and the Merkle nodes or the trust nodes that are essentially going to be doing a lot of that processing. So it shouldn't really need to be forkable, especially once it's complete. And that's going to basically have kind of transactional based rules in it, I guess you can say. We'll get a little more detail on that, which means that the network will be able to soft force update any new rules without having to change the core code. And that's something that's going to be very valuable as things expand, or we say, hey, you know, the 3DC in theory worked this way, but we want to improve it this way. We'll be able to do that in kind of a true programmable chain that'll be done with voting on the actual 3DC, and then have updates or activations after there. So in a way, the code or the language written on the actual lower level script will be almost like coding the blockchain itself without having to deal with the C, but it'll be, I can just send this code out if I'm a developer with the developer contract, and people can utilize that and say, okay, well, we agree with this consensus update or not. And like an example with Bitcoin, if this were possible, somebody could just send out a little script or a contract to say, hey, I'm a developer, I signed it with my developer key, I want to increase the block size to 2 megabytes, and then the network will be able to agree on that transaction and vote on it. And if that vote clears, like right now they have the threshold of the amount of miners, well, more of the currency holders and the developer keys and all of that would vote on it, then that block size would automatically update in the code, and legacy nodes would be able to understand that, so that we don't have to have any hard forking, but we'll still be flexible enough to update the protocol.
All right. I like this next question. It's does the Nexus MDC include an operating system, or is it more like a world computer like Ethereum is?
Well, the 3DC, think about that as the actual cryptographic architecture. So with that, you can do many things. Right now, I mean, it's just basically signing off of this specific piece of data to the next person's piece of data, which the data could be your account balance, the data could be a contract, the data could be your own file that you want encrypted, but the decentralized computation will be done on the outer layers of it, because the data integrity is something that the 3DC is mainly going to ensure. Because that's one thing that Bitcoin does, is we say, hey, we have this data integrity, just like Factum or Counterparty piggybacked on top of the Bitcoin blockchain and used it for data integrity by reducing all of their blocks into a single hash and including that in Bitcoin. It's kind of similar that way, so that other sub-networks can form that regulate themselves, but still can validate and check themselves off of the 3DC. So, I mean, I wouldn't really call it an operating system as of yet. Now, I mean, as far as a longer term vision, I'd like the higher level, the 3DC, which is up here, to be able to start digging down. That's why we're talking with some people that used to work with Cisco about using some of the architecture that they have to, you heard from the last live, getting down into the actual IP levels and getting rid of transport control protocol, which is TCP, which is what the internet runs on now. And then once we get down that level, then we'll be able to get down to the OS levels, maybe make a Unix-based operating system on it. But as for right now, no, the plan, the 3DC is kind of a higher level, but we're planning on getting lower and lower. And, you know, distributed computing, I think, is going to be something that's extremely valuable in the system once we get there. But this is kind of like the inner core. I guess here I could draw something right here. I'll pull this paper right here. And I mentioned this briefly before, but it's kind of an architecture that's based off of, so it's got 3 cores, 3 tiers to it. So let me just draw this real quick. So, and this is actually what we're going to be using for some of our CubeSat antennas. But if you look at that, so the 3DC is that. It's the inner core. Let me write this here. And then these would be the computation layers. So like that. So you got the 3DC right here, which is the ledger levels, and then you got the voting tiers right here, which is what's going to be able to regulate the different rule sets for the ledger levels, and then these would be your computation layers out here. So right now the Tau is addressing this, but once we have this, then we have a scalable cryptographic infrastructure that then we can actually handle global voting, because I mean, we can't really do that on a blockchain. It's not scalable enough to even process digital transactions. And then out here, they're going to work off the voting tiers, where like this could be a routing layer, so that routes can be defined by votes of groups. So if there's, let's say, a malicious route or something the network doesn't really like to compute for, let's say, you know, websites that, you know, are less than ethical, as I guess I'll say, then we'll have the powers to collective authority to decide what we want on our network and not.
All right, and for those watching, the 3DC and the MDC are the same thing. The MDC is
multi-dimensional chain, and then 3DC is just 3-dimensional chain. So, I mean, we kind of been bouncing back and forth between MDC and 3DC, but some of the marketing team figured that it would be a little clearer to distinguish for people about, you know, let's say 3DC instead of MDC, because people can conceptualize that. I mean, it's difficult to conceptualize dimensions, just like in a world of squares and triangles are going to have a hard time understanding what a sphere is. You know, we're in a 3 or 4-dimensional space, so it's a little more difficult to comprehend. So 3DC is kind of what we're going with, unless the community has other input about what they think is good or bad. But that's kind of our direction of thought as of late.
okay. Can the Nexus MDC be converted to SiSi compatibility, if so desired?
Well, ASICs are essentially, I mean, nobody can stop anybody from making an ASIC. So, I mean, the mining side of things, as far as the proof of work, I mean, you can make an ASIC to do anything. An ASIC means application-specific integrated circuits. So essentially, it's transistor for transistor computer program on the hardware levels, which is what makes it a lot more efficient, because most CPUs are called universal computers, so they can do any type of computation. Quantum computers are like glorified ASICs, if we want to talk about that. So, I mean, Yeah, I mean, ASICs, it's up to other people if they want to make ASICs. We have the SK1024 hashing algorithm. I didn't really design it to be ASIC hard because it's just kind of a pointless effort. It's only a matter of time and popularity that creates ASIC resistance. If you're not as popular, or if it takes, you know, certain costs where it's not profitable for Bitmain or whoever to produce ASICs for it, I don't really see that being anything great. And then the ASIC itself, I don't really see that being a huge advancement in security, even though you have a higher hashing power. It's based on your relative hashing power and cost for that hashing power. And ASICs drastically reduce the cost of the hashing by having smaller chips, and they also drastically increase the capacity of the hashing. So it's all kind of a relative game that way.
Yeah. So, and that answers the next question too. So, which version of the Tau, or which version of the Tau will the MDC 3DC be implemented at?
Okay, well, it's going to be implemented in a series of steps. So maybe I can work on a diagram here. The Tau stands for Tritium, Omnium, and Obsidian. So it's 3 activations of the locks. So let's see if I just draw a basic 3DC top-down view right now. It basically, so you got the transaction level locks. Everybody knows that. And those do horizontally. So we got B, T, and then lowercase t. So this would be, hold on. So I'll just call this L3, L2, and L1. So as we see right here, this is just a basic 3DC diagram, right? We got our block level locks here. Let's see if I can. And then we got our trust level locks right here. And then we have our transaction locks right here. So these 3 check and balance one another. So what's going to happen is L1s right here, those are going to be activated with the Tritium trust activation. So let's see if I can write it upside down. All right, so that's the Tritium side right there, right? Now, L2 is going to get to Omnium here. I'll just write it here, it's faster. And then L3 is going to be Obsidian. So think of it like, I mean, the folding of protein or whatever you want to call it. One lock level starts here, and then the next lock level activates, and then the next lock level activates. So that way it's a smooth transition, and each lock level has time to build in the network. People have time to build the trust on each one of those and the weight. Because, I mean, even launching a 3DC like from ground would be a little more difficult. It's almost easier to do it on a live chain because you can have the series of steps that implement it and you have time instead of just throwing it all out as one. So the reason it's these 3 levels too is for the simplicity, and you don't want to change too many moving parts at once. But the second stage is too, we're still Bitcoin advocates. We love Bitcoin. Just because we're improving on the protocol or working off of some of the code doesn't mean that we think we're better or we're going to beat. And it's never really about that for us. We're more kind of cooperation driven. I think in my personal philosophy, cooperation tends to drive more innovation. If people actually work together, then people end up not replicating 10 of the same technologies with a few simple tweaks. They can make that so much better together and combine all of that. So, I mean, essentially the goal is that the Tau framework, as it unlocks and we start proving that is capable of what it's supposed to be capable of, then Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can start utilizing that because it's open source technology. It's out there for the betterment of the industry. Now, I mean, some people may, be concerned of, oh, hey, well, certain forks may want to take this code and that code. Well, that's just the nature of it. And the market generally decides that. Just like PIVX uses, zero cash protocol or zero coin protocol along with the Dash protocol. But I mean, Dash is still ruling because they're the main innovators, they're the leader. Just like, I mean, there's a lot of clones of Bitcoin, like Litecoin, for instance, which is pretty much the same thing. And Bitcoin still rules because it's the forerunner of that technological advancement, and value generally follows those that produce value in the outer world. So that's kind of our philosophy on the Tau.
Okay. Like you brought up some security type coins on anonymous coins. Is there any plans for anonymity in Nexus, or that's one of the questions in here?
I mean, future, but one of the reasons I guess, not really put much time into thinking in that respect is the fact that I think anonymous coins kind of drive a lot of negative bias on markets. Now, I think privacy is a very beautiful thing and it's something that we need, but you have a catch-22 with it because you have, let's say, this coin over here that has anonymous developer funds, or even I think the Zcash protocol. I mean, you can't even see how much was mined. So, I mean, the developers have no accountability. They could pre-mine billions of it and you'd never know. And it also, it's kind of bred dark markets. And in a way, I mean, we're facing a lot of regulatory issues right now, and that's been kind of becoming more evident since 2014. And even bigger than that, it's making some of these powers of the world a little bit obsolete from this new technology. So creating environments that incubate dark markets and any of the sort, I think is going to work against us more than it will work for us. Now, I think there's a time in the future where we'll be able to develop certain encryption systems where you have the sub networks and then you have certain sets of nodes that escrow and verify transactions for certain people, and the contracts make sure that this escrow is not violated by this, and creating groups that verify, and then everyone can check and balance that data, and then having maybe encryption keys or something of the sort for semi-private, you know, if you want a specific transaction private, but then, you know, other things have to be public, like public organizations have to have financials public for the community to audit, developers, ambassadors, all those other things. So it's kind of a balance, and that's kind of a lower priority right now until we finish the 3DC, but it's definitely something we're willing to look into in the future. But I think it needs a bit of balance. Instead of purely anonymous, it should be private and, you know, evoking privacy for people, but also public enough where there's auditability for those that represent more than just themselves.
Okay, thank you. The next question here is, everybody knows Bitcoin, but very few know Nexus. Are there specific actionable plans that parts of the team are working on to get the word out? And how do you plan on doing that?
Well, I mean, I can speak from my perspective now. I mean, we have a marketing team. We've been making a lot of connections in different places. I mean, Vector is one of them, and I'll mention some of the other ones at later times as they grow in maturity. But I mean, my premise has always been, and it seems to have brought us this far, is produce value in the outer world, and that value will always be redirected into what you do. So, I mean, getting onto like the conference now, I mean, the value may not have been reflected in the price at that moment, possibly from whales or all this Bitcoin activity we've been having lately. But I mean, the value that came from that is still churning, and there's a lot of people that came on board from it. And there was a very positive vibe in it and a lot of inspiration that came from it. And there was over 430 people that came to there. And I mean, not just that, I mean, Ron Paul, I mean, he'd never really realized how many people he'd inspired. And we end up having a wonderful dinner with him and like continuing to talk further with him. And he's a really good down to earth guy. So, I mean, some of these connections are, you know, inevitably going to pay off. Now, in the short term, I know it seems like a long time, a month in crypto, but I mean, having come this far and grown this far and then continuing to build so many new value points that may take a little more time to incubate, I see it as very successful. So I guess to summarize all of that is just produce value in the outer world, not just internally in the crypto world. A lot of coins are saying, well, we're better than this coin because we do this. But we're kind of saying, well, how can we help the everyday consumer? How can we make this more readily available? How can we help educate people about certain things like our white paper? We got a little criticism for it being, you know, teaching people about blockchain, but it was really designed to help people that come into blockchain learn what it is and understand some of these things, and it got more complex. So, you know, I think there's I can't speak on the exact number, but I think it's, I mean, 10 million, 20 million people in crypto right now. And there's a world of 7 to 8 billion out there. And having cube satellites that even give people access to use the financial transactions, I mean, that's going to produce incredible value in Africa. Having ability to, I mean, like we were saying, coming back from the conference, man, I wish we had our CubeSats up right now because we can't get service. Or, you know, so many other value points that we're penetrating in the world, even, you know, helping Scott Hayes' movie, you know, donating Nexus for Molly. And you guys should watch Molly. It's a very inspiring movie. So produce value in the outer world and it comes back in, and the marketing team is working on simplifying the ideas so that everybody can have it in more digestible steps, because we're talking about kind of very forefront technology. We're leaders in this space. So I think the biggest challenge of adoption right now is the complexity of understanding and also the cryptic nature of understanding Nexus. It's better now, but I mean, it's been a puzzle to even figure out what it is. And I mean, that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. But I think, you know, we'll become a victim of our own success if we don't make sure that we can clarify things better, which is what we're addressing with the new websites and getting the marketing team making clear defined messages and connections and so on and so forth.
Excellent. Have you, Colin, reached out to the Bitcoin core team in order to contribute to Bitcoin some of the improvements that you put into Nexus and are working to put into Nexus?
Not currently. I mean, I can if we want. I've got kind of friends with Jeff Garza here and there. We shoot it back and forth. He was interested in some of the things. I mean, I may submit some pull requests with some of the Tritium code, like, you know, the legacy LLP, and I mean, maybe give them an extra compile option for the lower level database, or, you know, I mean, they can pick it on their own accord. So, I mean, I've been more concentrating on building and designing right now than saying, hey, here, use this. You know, I mean, if other people would like to go out to people and reach out, I think that would be good for community involvement. I'm building things, and that's the best thing I can be doing with my time.
Did Colin think about patenting some of his inventions like the LLD, LLP, LLL, LLH system, and now the MDC? I think not, but what would prevent people stealing it and use it to create higher quality shitcoins?
I guess I can comment that in two parts. The first is the only reason I would ever patent it would be for public domain, so that it was something that somebody else couldn't patent. And then, I mean, the second thing is it's open source technology. And I think the value of open source technology, even if people take the code and make shitcoins out of it, we used to be a lot more concerned about that in the CoinShield days when, I mean, the clones were rampant. But I see the cloning a lot less these days because those that clone source code can just make an ERC20 token right now, and they don't even have to maintain the blockchain. So I'm not as concerned about it now. If there was, you know, concern in the community and you guys would want us to make some open source patents, yeah, that's the thing. But I definitely want this technology to be open for people to build on, because if we make it some private centric owned thing by certain individuals, I think it's going to degrade into, you know, kind of a corrupted system again, because that creates a central point of failure, and I'd rather not have that.
Can we get an abstract on the features of the upcoming Tritium release? For now, it's been a bit vague, but there have been talks about an alpha and a beta version or a trust update, etc.
Okay. Well, here, I'll just start here. So here's the trust. Here's how it's going to work. So as we can see here, this is time, and this is your trust. So basically, this is the green. This is your positive side. This is your negative side. So instead of there being an expiration system like there is now, it's going to be an equation that basically weights the difficulty. So your positive trust moves up, but your negative trust moves up about 3 times as fast. So there's this, sorry, I'll bring it up again. There's this hotspot right here. This is going to be your ideal window to get a trust block. And if you hit it right around here, you can even get a little bit more trust just for timing it correctly. And then up here, as you continue without a block, you're going to eventually just weight it down where you're going to zero out your time. So you earn time credits on it. Now that algorithm has existed. It's running just not as a consensus rule. I've just been monitoring it on the network to make sure that I have the values tuned properly, because it's kind of like, think of it like a mathematical engine. There's a few equations and we need to set the numbers to make sure that they're set right. So there's that. And then signature chains is another thing. That's essentially going to assure further quantum security even without post-quantum cryptography. I explained a little bit about that, but just think of it as your own blockchain login system. I can draw something right now about it. That's going to be another notable feature. And then the last part is going to be L1 locks. So level 1 locks, transaction locks. And so that's going to allow people to start locking transactions. And that's going to be almost a new form. I wouldn't call it minting, because what it's going to be doing is just creating a consensus on transactions that have been broadcasted and then allowing messages to be sent and signed off between one another to make sure a transaction is valid. Now, the one drawback of that is the fact that you can have a race attack where there's 2 transactions with the same input that are broadcasted at the same time. But as far as my thinking is, we don't really have to worry about that, because the only person that would broadcast the same input twice would be an attacker, and somebody that maybe has an error on their side would just see that they invalidated their transaction. So we don't have to worry too much about lock races. So L1s are also going to allow cell phone level locking to happen too, which we're getting some developers together for the iOS application. Brian's sitting there agreeing over there. We've got a couple people. And that's going to be something that's going to open the door for everyday people to lock transactions and earn a little bit of Nexus. So the transaction fee won't go to miners. There's going to be no fee, and that's going to allow people to earn it based on their contribution to the locks. And then that's going to create the first level of weighting and trust. Now, the signature chain itself is something that's useful because that creates your own identity, but it's not an identity that's public to you. It's kind of pseudo-anonymous, which means like, here's my cryptographic key. You can tell anybody you want that that's your key, or you can remain private, but that creates your reputation in there. So as you build up more trust, you get more credit and you get more reputation, and then you have a little bit more locking power in that way. And then miners then therefore come, and then they have to basically hash that transaction out, and that allows us to do smaller blocks where we only have to include.
So again, it gives you a little bit of privacy.
Yeah, it gives you privacy, but reputation, and it's an upgrade to the trusted system. Right now, the trust keys is just said simply a key. Now, a SIG chain it's similar to HD, where it's hierarchical deterministic, but it's different in the sense where you basically are creating two hashes. I'll draw it right here, where you have your secret and then you have your PIN, and those are then hashed again into your root hash, and then the root hash is what's plugged into a public key, and then the public key then again is hashed into a next hash. So what that means is that in order to spend, you have to reveal the public key right here and the SIG. So what that does is that protects the key with Grover's algorithm. Now I'll show right there. So you have your secret and your PIN. Now the PIN, so with these two, you can generate your billions of keys. And then that goes into your root hash right here, which then is used as your private key to then generate your public key. And then you hash your public key for your next hash, and you say, this is the next hash that can claim, or this is the next key that can claim the next part of my signature chain, which signature chains are going to be more account-based. We're going to kind of be dumping the unspent transaction output UTXO set, just because it was designed for a form of anonymity, but there's already a lot of AIs that are capable of claiming that and tracking that. And so it's a little bit inefficient because every input requires a new signature, and you always have to have two outputs. And so every signature, I mean, at least for us, would be, what would it be? 72, 144 bytes, since we use a 72-byte keys. And so if you think about that, then you have 10 inputs. That makes a kilobyte transaction. So this should get transactions down to, I mean, a few hundred bytes to a kilobyte, which is something that's going to be very, very valuable. So those are the basic features that I'm planning on in this specific update. Now, Tritium Beta and Alpha, those are going to include the new wallet. Obviously, it's got the new lower level protocol in the multi-threading of it, and a whole new Tritium message set, which amplifies the speed and processing in the network. And then, what's it called? Then the Tritium regular update is going to be with just this simple trust update for people to be happy about their trust keys being more thorough. And then signature chains and L1 locks will come through Tritium Trust, which is going to be the next consensus update. And then the Tritium Plus is going to be kind of a cleanup and getting rid of some of the legacy code in there and speeding up the processing, adding new message sets. And that's where the contracting, I'm going to make a basic contracting engine, because you're going to need debits, credits, you know, sign, allow, require, basic things like that. And so that way, through the whole TAO, we can be building up our contract set so that we make sure that we have useful contracting commands and that are very easy to understand for people, so that we don't encounter certain mistakes that have been happening with Ethereum, or even making more use cases in ERC20 tokens.
Okay. Next question is, Viz, have you contemplated about a new possible attack vectors on the MDC? I think instead of the 51% attack that's expensive, targeting trust would be much easier.
Well, you can target trust, but then you have to target the amount of signature chains you have, and you have to target the trust on every one of those signature chains. And then you have to combat and take over the L2 locks, which is with stakes. Then you'd have to corner at least 51% of the stake in the network and 51% of the stake trust. And then to do the 51% mining attack, you'd have to overtake all of the 51% hashes. So think about it like it's building a chain in real time with each level of locking it in. And then when you get to the final mining interval, which will be about 1 to 2 minutes, then miners are going to be hashing that, and they're going to be submitting shares into it. They're going to be put into a Merkle tree, and those shares are going to create a root hash, but they all share that same data. And so they're verifying that data, because with Bitcoin proof of work, one of the vulnerabilities or issues, I guess you can say, is there's thousands and thousands of people mining, but all that mining power is wasted if you don't get the block. Hence the issue with orphans. So with this, everybody's hashing power will contribute, so the hashing power will actually do a lot more. So 51%ing attacking the network would require you to completely overtake all of the transaction volume. You'd have to take over all the SIG chains. You'd have to Sybil attack with thousands of nodes that have way more trust than the already established chain. You'd have to double and get all the weight higher than the weight of all the T1 or the L1 locks. Then you'd have to weight it higher on the second level locks, which is taking over all the stake, taking over the stake weight and weighting that in with more blocks signifying on that specific L2 lock. And then you'd have to go through and then have 51% of the hashing power to submit more shares with more weight than all of the other ones have on there. So if somebody tries to, let's say, fork it off here and create their whole own new block interval, they'd have to completely recreate everything that the network's already doing over here and have more weight and more trust. And so weight is kind of like the amount of work you do it on it, and trust is the amount of time you've contributed doing that work consistently over time. So you'd have to hijack all of those factors. So in fact, it would be much harder to 51% attack a Nexus 3DC than it would a conventional Bitcoin-based blockchain.
Excellent.
Yep.
Regarding imposing limits on hashes, how can this be achieved without compromising security and opening ways for people to game the system? And in fact, why do it at all?
Well, limiting hashes, I would assume it would be setting a minimum difficulty. I'd only want to say the minimum difficulty should be set for somebody spamming very low difficulty hashes and then trying to get reward for it. So there's going to be a minimum threshold. But getting back to square one at the very beginning of this whole conversation, I was talking about how transactions, when they're voted on by, let's see, this diagram, when you have a transaction put into the 3DC that's validated by this core into the 3DC with, let's say, a rule of minimum difficulty, the network of miners and everybody can vote and change that dynamically if they will. So I don't really see how limiting that would game. It would just be a minimum threshold, just like a mining pool. You'd want to accept only a minimum share. Otherwise, people are just going to spam a lot of low difficulty shares and they're going to overload your sockets.
All right. I'd like to know about the implications of the top 100 and top 10 Nexus addresses owning such a large proportion of coins. So I guess this person's concerned about how much Nexus people hold and if they'll hold it.
Well, I mean, from what I've seen from my observations, which is all I can really speak from, I've seen those addresses actually thickening, which means those top 100 or 200 or 300 seem like people that are constantly buying because they see the potential value in it. So I would say that they are more in for a long-term hold than they are for a quick pump and dump. Now, I can't speak on everybody's opinions. I do know there's a few people on that top 100 list that I know, guys know too. So I really don't see it as a negative thing. I see it just as a natural progression of things. Now, eventually that's going to be laid out or leveled more as there's more Nexus being produced through these different levels of locks. So, I mean, it is what it is. And I mean, from my observations, I don't see it as a negative thing. I see it as people that really believe in the project and have held for a very long time.
I agree. The next question we have here is, how can you be sure the influencers will allow you to send satellites to space? There are regulations and a crypto network might fall under them. Okay,
so there's many regulations. Right now, we're going to be having to deal with the FCC and then the ITU, which is International Telecommunications Unit, to license specific frequencies. One of them is working off of X-band, registering a frequency on the X-band, which would be about Wi-Fi frequencies. We can run, if it's essentially run to higher frequencies or look into optical communications, but essentially it's pretty standard to run a satellite out there in space, and they'd have to do a lot of political lobbying to counter that. So, I mean, I'm sure it's a threat that we're going to be dealing with and a challenge, but it's not something that I would see stopping us, because the way it works with international borders is from the ground to 60 kilometers up. That's considered territory of that country, but above that, it's international territory. So when Russia put Sputnik 1 up, I mean, one of the reasons they did it is they wanted to prove that they can fly over the US without there being any international treaties broken. So essentially, when they're up there, there's no law against it. Now, working with Galactic Sky, they're getting their frequencies licensed with the FCC. As long as we stay within broadcasting limits, which means we can only use so many watts at certain frequencies because of radiation causing in tissue, then it should be fairly fine. I mean, the world as I'm seeing it right now, it would be first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, from what Gandhi said. Well, it seems like, I mean, especially with Russia taking up their cryptocurrency baton, the world is moving towards accepting it a lot more. So I don't see cryptocurrencies as an anarchist thing anymore. I think they're kind of showing themselves, especially with the critical mass of people involved, that they have a lot of value to contribute. And, you know, even bankers can eventually join in later on. But the thing is, it gives every person the choice to have more options for themselves. And some people may want to choose a crypto bank, AKA an exchange, in order to store their coins. And there will be many, many options, but we're providing the ability for people to take some of these things into their own hands. So full circle back, we got a couple things and regulatory hurdles to deal with. I mean, legally, you can still be broadcasting. This is the uplink that we're going to have a little bit of the problem with. I mean, you can only use so many watts on a cellular device, and we got certain bands to worry about with certain cloud coverage. Like I think KU band has difficulty with clouds. But as long as we stay within regulation and allowable limits and continue to be persistent and prove that there's enough people that want this to happen, I don't see it being impossible. I see it being very likely and in the very near future.
All right, excellent. This question kind of ties into one of the earlier questions, if there's time. Mind asking Colin to explain if Nexus will have the ability to host sidechain cryptocurrencies and blockchains off the side chains, as in how other interesting future projects can benefit from Nexus.
Yeah, now we keep getting back to the side tokens talk. I've heard it a few times, and I've gotten a few emails from people saying, well, hey, if you don't support ICOs, then you're not going to keep up with things. Now, I very much agree that crowdfunding in the way of token sales is not a bad idea. It's actually an innovation forward, but I also see, again, the catch-22, where it's a problem when anybody can make this token, or it's a problem when anybody can go in. Now, I think having licensed businesses working off of those assets and using that as their own form of a stock market would be the way to do it, and having a lot more verification, and also making it dividends paid out to specific people that invest. Let's say there's a token sale from a company that wants to do it on the Nexus blockchain. Well, that contract should have the requirement of dividends, not just paid out in the ownership of the token, but in the actual profits in the business, in the way that it should be done. Now, like I said earlier, I think this race in the ICOs reminds me a lot of the 2013, 2014 days. But it just makes it a little bit easier. So when it comes to that, that is definitely something that is being assessed. But as I've said before, it's something that needs to be carefully figured out and well thought out. Otherwise, it could create a bit more of a conundrum than it will solve.
Based upon trust.
Trust and verifiability and accountability. Right now, anybody that sends Ethereum into an ERC20 token contract, there is no accountability. The developers can move that Ethereum all they want. There's nothing locking it in there. You are essentially buying a token with Ether. You are not buying into a company. And that's a bit of a problem. So I think Ethereum's a good testing ground to show us what not to do. And as we sit back and watch, we can find the proper solutions. And that's something that Kiara and I are figuring out. We're going to call them IOs. which initial asset offering or something of the form. So, I mean, that's in the works, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. It's going to be something that's going to take a lot of time to do right. But if done right, I think it can provide a great value to the world.
Can you provide any information about current?
Well, I guess all I'll really say is there's a big need for certain features and aspects of exchanges in the form of distributed exchanges, in the form of holding your own tokens, and in the form of IAs, as I just said, and doing things properly. So there's certain things that we are addressing and working on, and that's about as much as I'll say about that.
Okay, fair enough. I understand that a significant portion of each block mine goes to a development fund. Is there somewhere transparent that we can see how these funds are being used? I think it should instill even more confidence in Nexus if it's possible to see those funds are being used responsibly.
Yeah, of course. So that goes back to the accountability and the transparency of everything. So if you look in the GitHub, you go to source/global or source/core/global.cpp. You'll be able to see the 26 addresses. Now, that's kind of the old CoinShield way we did it. I want to make sure that that's addressed properly. What's being developed in the 3DC is, as you see with the voting layers, developer and ambassador contracts. So it's going to transition into the ambassador and developer reserves kind of fill up every block, and then a certain amount is withdrawn from it in one of the 26 addresses. So what's going to be happening is we'll be able to create a democratic contract to appoint somebody to be an ambassador or appoint somebody to be a developer, and they're going to have a signature chain on that so that the public can vote people in and vote people out and control how much funding is being used in ambassador funding and how much is being used in developer. And if they see any misappropriation of that, they can simply void the contract and create a vote around that. So that's the way we're transitioning towards. As it is right now, it's about 15% in over the course of time that's mined out. Now, I mean, we essentially, I mean, if we've ever needed any development costs, there's certain people that are off market that, you know, have sold person to person in order to just help, and we put that into the Nexus Embassy. So if anybody's concerned about the spending of some of the funds, or they want to look through the trails of it, you can check those addresses and look at it on the Block Explorer and make your suggestions if you have any ways that you think we can improve that process.
All right, and that kind of answered the question following that. But I guess there's a portion of this question that says, do you sell coins at preset dates according to a schedule or when the price is high?
I mean, it's really just kind of based upon if there's a necessity and if there's an inquisition. So if somebody says, hey, you know, I'd like to buy a little Nexus, I'll say, well, hey, we have this budget, we need to do this. Okay, well, we'll sell this at a certain amount. It's not really been tied to we're only going to sell at this price or at specific dates. It's just been kind of on an as need basis so that we don't sell more than we need so that we can keep that in the embassy for future use.
Yeah, I think from the way this is worded, it seems like they're more concerned that we're not like just dumping at the top type thing.
No, we've never sold any on the market. It's something that we don't do. And that's kind of a strong philosophy we've always had. That's why, you know, I've met certain people that would buy off the market in order to keep that from influencing the price, but allow it to be self-sufficient development.
How many transactions per second can the Nexus MDC handle?
Well, I don't have that data yet. Based on the design of it, it should theoretically scale to whatever level is needed. Now, when you have the T1 locks, they're going to be also forming smaller subgroups that can check and balance each other, especially with the trust ones checking and balancing each other, so we can create parallel processing on that in the horizontal dimension. So it should theoretically, when it's done, be able to handle whatever load it needs to, but I can't say a number that it's going to handle before it's built. It's still an architecture that's being developed, and I'm sure it's going to be improved on as it grows, and it's the next step. So I guess we'll find out about that. As Nexus stands right now, it can process 50 to 70 transactions per second. On the Tritium level, it's going to be multiplying that value significantly. Let's see, we got let's say 1/10 of the transaction. So maybe 500 to 700 per second is what it should be able to do. The capacity with the Tritium when we have the locking levels, and then when transactions are locked, you only need to reference the TXID in the block instead of actually sending the whole transaction data, which is only about 64 bytes for us. And then and should increase that number. So once we get Tritium out and we put it to certain tests, I think that's when we'll be able to start predicting better benchmarks forward.
Okay. This one is kind of tied in with the next one. We'll do this one. If the transactions on Nexus will be free, if the transactions on Nexus will be free, so how will the miner be rewarded? I'm reading these questions as they were written. So
they're going to be rewarded by the actual block level rewards. So, I mean, Bitcoin uses a deflationary system, which can cause problems. I mean, gold has an inflation rate of 0.5% to 3% per year. And so the natural inflation in Nexus, very slight, is what's going to be rewarding the miners, and that allows transactions to be free on the L1 levels. And then the L1 lockers will also get a piece of their pie, a piece of their proportion, and it'll be minimal amounts of inflation and prevent, you know, a lot of different vectors from happening where it could become deflationary collapse with Bitcoin. We have no idea what's going to happen, but certain systems that have a slightly expanding supply all develop, how should I say, an industry around that new supply, just like there's many industries about gold mining all the time because people are always going to be mining gold and making things with gold. And so as the market cap grows, that'll be a very, very minimal impact upon the price.
Yeah, and this one kind of ties into that one. It says, will the transaction also be free from an exchange to another exchange? I doubt that. That's completely up to the exchange.
Yeah, that's up to the exchange, and if they want to put a transaction withdrawal fee on it, generally that's one of their monetization techniques, along with actually utilizing, what is it called? What's it? Trade fees for every time you buy and sell.
Is it difficult for you to stay focused and complete a certain task, Tritium, when your genius mind is often coming up with other revolutionary ideas?
In other words, do I have ADD? I can say, like, I mean, some people, I mean, I guess this is a good moment. Some people are like, oh, he's a scatterbrain, he's this. I guess I can clarify it with a parallel process, and I have many things happening at the same time. And so I could be processing something while I'm talking to somebody else, or I could be saying something, but I've already thought the thought out and the words are just a little slower. And same with the code. But I mean, focus is, I mean, I guess that's one of the difficulties I do face sometimes. Yeah, I'm working on like hash-based signature schemes and things right now, and the Tritium at the same time. But I mean, on the other side, no, I get things, I like to have a variety of things happening at once. So I work on this and work on this and work on this and kind of move them around, or go play a little music or things like this. So I like, I mean, I'm kind of I like to do a lot of different types of things and pursuits. So you could call it scattered, or you could call it ADD, or you could call it unfocused, but it's just that I have a focus of many things at once, and I only have two hands. So I work best by coding out some stuff for Tritium, and then working on the 3DC, and then working on, you know, researching some of these new encryption schemes, and then coding on the LLD, and then playing some piano, and then it all kind of forms a circle of like a unified focus, multifaceted, I guess you could say.
Yep, everybody thinks differently and processes information differently.
That's the way I think.
How is the integrity of the blockchain maintained when the transaction processes, etc., is divided up between different nodes? Also, how is redundancy built in? Okay,
so it's capable of redundancy because multiple nodes copy multiple parts. Now, the integrity of the data is by the 3DC structure. So, I mean, a transaction in a contract can be stored on the node that actually processes that, and they're required to. And then the trust of the routes and the verifiability of those routes from other people is how it can spread out. So by partitioning it out by trust and the weight, and also your verification of the data you process, and having that data checksum. You can't manipulate that data as long as the data is processed by the whole network in real time. After those locks are completed, and then a checkpoint after we have the block, and then a checkpoint lock, which sets the state of the whole chain, all that other data can just be kind of load balanced by other nodes. And so that adds redundancy because you have more nodes that have capability of that data. They register to service that data. And then you have other people that build up trust by saying, hey, I serviced all these transactions. Well, I better keep those transactions on my phone. And if I don't want to earn money from locking it, I better have it. And so if somebody asks for it from you and you don't have it, you'll get a little bit of a reduction on your trust. So that's kind of the ways that it's being designed right now, especially with the lower level database keychain. What that's going to enable to do is have routes for each data. So you register on a certain key and you say, hey, I'm supplying this data for that. And you do that at, you know, your good graces, or maybe we add a proof of storage mechanism where people that need to get that data can. But essentially it's by people and making sure that it's all checksum. And then the 3DC, kind of like the skeleton, is going to be very light because it's only going to have to contain the hashes, and then all the meat of it can be stored and partitioned around. And then the old archived 3DC data can also be, since all of that 3DC data will be checksummed again or hashed again with a checkpoint that everybody agrees upon again, nobody will be able to manipulate any of that data on the back ends, and other people will just have nodes that they get certain rewards for holding that data.
All right. Are there any plans for peer reviews of the Tau architecture and game theory from people outside of the Nexus community, as in academia or other experts in the field?
Yes. So, I mean, one step I'm looking forward to is getting some, I guess, architectural, what would we call it, review by certain professors like ASU. We're working on kind of starting to talk with them more. I mean, peer review can be done anytime. If you guys say, hey, how can I game this way? You know, we'll say, well, you could or you couldn't or whatever. I'm not going to say that I have every answer figured out. I'm not going to claim that because I don't. Nobody does. But this is our next logical step in this architecture. And as it's developed, I'm sure we're going to uncover places where people can try to game it. And that's just the nature of development. So in light of that, I would hope it would be more than just academia or other thing. I think if anybody wants to come and try to attack it, or maybe we attack the 3DC thread or something to get more community involvement, because the more minds we have breaking this apart and seeing how could I attack this, how could I game this, I think the stronger it's going to become. So everybody's always welcome to get peer review from anybody they want to get, or do it themselves, or ask their, you know, professor or whatever else, and we'll do our best on doing the same.
What's the relationship between Galactic Sky and Nexus? Is Nexus going to be the operating system of Galactic Sky architecture and framework?
Okay, so Nexus is going to be storing itself on there, and then it's a software-defined satellite system. So it's running their own form of, it's a Unix-based Galactic OS. And it's also, they're partnered with Citrix on a virtual machine. So think about it like AWS in space, where you can utilize imaging systems, you can use radio contact, you can do weather control, or you can store blockchains and beam it down from Earth, or, you know, get your own little section of it and save your private keys on there, or whatever else. So the nature of the relationship is we're helping on the beta testing side of it, and we're going to be also bringing some resources to helping make it more robust with our own knowledge and consulting. And then, you know, we have our letter of intent signed and we're working towards our contract, which we should be seeing that in the next few weeks. We're working on getting that publicized more and solidified. And so some of the details, the fine comb details of it, you will be getting later. And I guess we'll speak on it then.
Does Nexus have any legal framework or corporate framework? And if it does Nexus have a foundation, and what's its governance system? Who is it on its board of directors? Does this foundation pay a LLC that pays and employs developers?
Okay, so we've kind of kept it loose for a while, but more recently, especially with the conference, we needed a legal entity. So we have a 501(c) nonprofit, which is called the Nexus Embassy. You guys can look it up if you'd like. The founding members of the board would be Kiera Reed, Keith Smith, Preston Smith, me, and then it's got opportunities for 5 more members. It's still in its early stages. There's a few people that are paid through the embassy, like Brian over there. We just got him hired on, and a lot of us are still volunteers. But essentially, that's the legal framework that we have right now. But it's eventually, as I spoke earlier about ambassador contracts, the board is going to be ruled by those, and the funds will be ruled by that. Right now, we have to do it in the form of what we have available to us, which is a little more manually. But as we can develop more of the computing infrastructure, then we're going to be capable of decentralizing that further and tying these ambassador contracts and developer contracts to specific legal entities that anyone decides to set up, which means a developer could set up their own LLC and have a developer contract owned with that on the paper or whatever else they choose to do. So right now, that's how it stands, but it's very open for improvement, especially now and in the future.
Excellent. What day, hour, minute will Tritium be released?
Huh. I tried to think of something like smart ass to say, but I didn't have anything come. I mean, I don't like giving hard dates because as we've experienced, there's, how should I say it, a conundrum in cryptocurrencies, which we hope people just stop doing, which is buy the rumor, sell the news. So I'll say the rumor is in year 3000 BC. Now you can sell the no news then. I don't know. Basically, it's going to be out when it's out, and you'll know when you'll know. And we're not going to give the whales something to pump the price up with and dump like they like to do with their conference. So we stay away from those dates for a very specific reason, and we stay away from roadmaps for a very specific reason, not because we like to keep the community in the dark, but there's a lot of people in the crypto sphere that tend to do a little more destruction from their self-interest than actually helps things. So we do our best as the development team to curb that. So I can tell you Tritium is coming. You've probably heard me say that before many times. You can form your own opinion about that, but you'll see it when you see it.
Perfect. I'll try to start by posing this. I'm not heavily versed in crypto yet, but love hearing from others that are. Colin's explanation of the 3D blockchain says that it will be able to keep all transactions on the chain, even microtransactions that for Bitcoin would be handled by the Lightning Network. How will these transactions be prioritized on the 3D chain, and what effect would somebody spamming 0.000001 Nexus transactions have on the network?
Okay, so I mean, priority can be based upon your size versus how much Nexus is sent out. I mean, setting small transactions, we're not going to have the dust spam attack vectors as large with the account base and signature chains, because dust spam attacks generally use hundreds of thousands of inputs of very, very 0.0000001s. But one way to combat that is to have every transaction you broadcast be required to wait and sign on 2 other transactions and maybe calculate a prime number, or do a small amount of work to broadcast your transaction, or throttle it on your signature chain, which means you got 1 transaction where it's no problem, but you send 2, you got to do a little more work, so that people that have a higher need from the 3DC by broadcasting multiple transactions end up having to do more work for nothing, while the L1 lockers get paid for locking those transactions. But the people that seemingly need to broadcast a lot of Nexus at very low amounts would most likely be caught in, I guess, a game of their own, where they would be stuck having to do processing for the network in order to get their transactions verified by L1 locks.
Where do you see Nexus in 12 months from now?
I'd like to say low Earth orbit. That's one place I see it. Now, another place is definitely want to see well into Obsidian. I mean, I'll say where I want to see, not where I see it. So many different constraints that we always run into. So, I mean, Tritium, I want to see that out. I want to see the full Tritium activated. I want to see Amine at least test netting and seeing the satellite up, vector operational, contracts in line and queue with our CubeSat design, which we've been designing right now, and working with actually Ash's father. She's right over there. He used to work for Iridium, very, very, very knowledgeable individual. So in parallel, we're building our own satellites which, you know, is going to be an open source design. Obviously, people will be able to put it on. We may have a service for Nexus type agreement where you can actually put up your own Cube satellite. You just purchase it with your Nexus. That'll be something, you know, those funds will go back to development costs and also the cost of the launch. So that's where we ideally see it now. The other part is the ground-based mesh networks. I hope to be seeing a lot more of our near field wireless technology working, the development of that mesh network technology, a lot more solidity in the ideas, a much, much more beautiful website, which should be not by you know, the next year, but it should be the next few months. But a lot more people in the development team. So far, we're having a lot of people, especially from the conference, coming in. There's a few people locally here. We're getting set up. Brian over there is starting to manage a lot of the agile development, which is very good. That's something that's, yeah, there it goes. That's something that's really helping significantly. So now I see that, I mean, we should be, I mean, multiples of years ahead of the last year of what we've done, the progress of this last year. I really hope to see much more progress as the community continues to grow and proliferate exponentially, which just creates exponential production. And especially since a lot of the big hurdles are over, which is the 3DC was a huge, huge thing because it's taken 3 years of thinking and analyzing and viewing and designing and thought experiments and game theory and passing the idea around and explaining. Keith knows I've been talking about it for a long time. So it's definitely, it's looking very bright for the next year, next few years. And I see a lot more rapid development. I see a lot more of these dreams becoming reality, and I see a lot more tangible products for people, a lot better marketing, a lot better clarity, a lot less cryptic nature of it, a lot more white papers, a lot more people involved, and a lot more connections and more widespread use.
All right, question in regards of real-world security. What I mean is this technology has potential to be massive everywhere in the world. And in my opinion, third world countries where finance systems are expensive, corrupt, not available. But these are also countries where the crime rate is much higher than the Western world. And human life to these criminals are worthless. The majority of people will be using smartphones to use Nexus, and a few will have access to a computer as well. Phone is like a normal wallet. And a computer at home would be your vault bank to keep the coins in, for example. Basically, is there any plans or thoughts around this? Is there any thoughts to build hardware devices to reach the poorest, you know, people in the world?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that because definitely that's something on our kind of mesh side of things, our hardware side of things, our satellite development side of things. There's, you know, concepts of an encrypted box, which you would be able to keep not just your coins, whatever, but your personal files. Also hardware coins, which can essentially just be flash memory with encrypted codes. Your signature chain and your PIN, which you can keep your PIN in your head. You can keep your sig chain in your head too, so somebody would have to extract that information out of you, which would be a little more difficult and resistant to certain things. Hardware wallets, it would be near field wallets. So I mean, pulling out my phone here, if you have, let's say, your phone and then you have a case on it, and then you have, let's say, a little coin. I'll just use this cap as an example. You can just go whoop if you want to send a transaction, and you'll be able to have, you know, access to your keys that way. But then you can copy this device and then you can throw it away. You can have a self-destruct button on it. If somebody's trying to steal it, just wipe the memory. So there's a lot of different hardware applications that are definitely in the works. Satellites are one of them because, as I said, financial systems are very expensive in certain third world countries, and most of them use their smartphones. Well, when smartphones can lock transactions and they can access the net and they can access and trend transactions up, they're going to be more self-sufficient on that, and the security levels can be done on hardware-based encryption and, you know, house-based encryption. And I think it would be a lot safer than even having cash these days, because cash can be stolen. But if you have an encrypted drive that you can just push a button to delete, or that requires a certain PIN to unlock the AES 256 encryption, then it's pretty much useless to an attacker. Or you can have decoy coins or many things like that. So hardware is definitely something that is in the works. We're probably going to be seeing that a little bit later because it's a little higher overhead to develop and enhance the hardware, but it's definitely something in the plan.
All right. This one was kind of answered earlier, but it's kind of a different question too. Question regarding the definition of Nexus. Would you consider Nexus as a cryptocurrency, a blockchain, a infrastructure, or a super platform?
All of the above minus super platform. I really don't know how it defines super platform. I mean, that sounds a little bit like a marketing gimmick, but I mean, it really just depends on what Nexus means to you and what level of it you're involved in. I mean, certain people that may not have a wallet can just say, what's Nexus? Oh, it means a connection to two or more things. It could be a friendship, or it could be somebody that you meet, or a group where you come together and you start solving some problems, or at least thinking about some problems. Or it could be the physical hardware, the nexus of the hardware devices forming the mesh, or the nexus of the satellites, or the nexus of minds, or the nexus of conferences. Or I mean, that's one thing that is which is good that was brought up, is Nexus is such a versatile word. That's one of the reasons we chose that for the name of this project, because there's a place for everybody in it, no matter what you do. I mean, connection is, in a way, I mean, everybody talks about, you know, you need to be connected. And when we're disconnected from things, when our neurons are disconnected, then we can't think as properly. So connection is something that is very, very valuable for human life, and providing the technology to enhance connection between people is our #1 goal, to help people find their purpose within that and connect with the world and be able to help and do things and improve it, because it's the connection of minds that brings unity, and it's unity that brings people to a certain idea and understanding. And through that certain idea and understanding, the control of the narrative information that the world has been thrown into for the last who knows how long is something that can actually be dissipated, because the only way narrative can be controlled is by people connecting to that control. So by allowing people to connect to each other and discover the truth for themselves, that's what makes it such a powerful idea. So full circle, it's all of those things minus a super platform.
Why are Nexus forums less active than Nexus Slack?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me, guys?
I mean, I personally, I can't stand Bitcoin talk. So
I'm trying to get back on there. I'm like, okay, well, I got to start getting a little more active. So, I mean, let me just answer that question is, do you guys want it to be a little more active? Get active. I mean, right now it's just Slack is where everybody goes, but well, you know, Slack capacity is full right now, which, I mean, that's a good thing. I think it's going to be appropriate to have different areas. I mean, I get pinged from Facebook to Twitter to Reddit to LinkedIn to all over the place, to Slack. So, I mean, let's get the Nexus forum going, guys. Start some conversations, get some things going. We've got 5,000 people in Slack. Why don't we have 5,000 people on the forum? I think the forums are really useful for referential information. Slack is good for real-time talk and yada, yada, but let's get the forum moving, guys, more. Let's get some accounts signed up. It's community-driven. It's community-run. It looks nice. And I mean, if that question's arising, like numerous people, I think it's not going to be the best that we could have if it's a little bit dead. I mean, I think it's going to give some people the wrong first impressions. So the more colorful we can make it, you know, let's get involved. Even talk about normal day-to-day stuff, or address your mining support questions to the Nexus forum, because then you're going to be able to give other people that referential information. I mean, do you know how many times we answer the same question? How do you buy Nexus? How do you mine this? Oh, I have this bug. I have that. Like, I think that's something that I think we could all do a lot more of, which is, you know, the team included with the community, in order to kind of bring that alive a little more. Because I think forums do have their use cases. It's just a certain application for certain purposes.
Okay. Is there a maximum or a minimum block size in the MDC? If so, what are they?
So not necessarily. So think about it like you take all this massive amount of information on the T1s and you condense it into a little checksum. And that checksum is the consistency of all of the other nodes. And then that checksum is then linked with other checksums in its own chain with the trust chain, right? So you got the transaction L1 level chains, blah, 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 and then your transactions down here. So then you got your L1 locks, the L2 locks, and then the L3 locks, which a miner will only be required to hash the T1, T2, and T3 locks with an M once, so that that lock then verifies that they lock the second level of the tree. Then the lower level of the tree is the transaction locks, and then the lowest level is all of the data. So that way miners only need to compute. I mean, let's say we're doing 1024-bit hashes for the T1, T2, T3. That's what, 384 bytes plus an N once, which is like, we've got 392 bytes, maybe 400 bytes per share. That's half a kilobyte, I guess, would be the maximum necessary size. I mean, I don't know if we really need to put a cap on it. A block lock is not like a block. It's the levels of locks go up the chain, but the block level lock is miners hashing those same 3 trust locks over and over again, which the trust locks are in their own tree from all the different Merkle level locks, and then so on and so forth. So it's very little payload for miners, and there's no worry about orphans. So that's where it's a win-win for everybody, because block size people on this side say, well, hey, mom and pop need to run this node, and big blocks are really hard for slow internets, and then I can't propagate my block, and Antpool decides to send out empty blocks. And then these big blockers over here say, we need to scale because we have massive transaction capacity and we can't scale with it. They're both right in their own regards, you know, and segregated witness addressed this side a little bit, and it helped with this side, but this is it's some more common ground because miners don't need to carry this giant freight ship to every single person on the planet. It's kind of like, it can be more parallel processed, and then the processing of all of that is verified by a single checksum, and then that checksum is verified by other checksums, and then the miner over here, they can, if they choose to, voluntarily check all the way down to the L1 levels and make sure that there's nobody on the L1s misappropriating themselves, just like the L1s check each other, and then the L2s check the L1s. The L2s can also check the L3s. So those 3 levels of locks give everybody the ability to check and balance each other. And if miners are putting out shares or attempted double spends over here, they're going to not really be too successful at that because the rest of everybody's going to know.
The coin cap is approximately 78 million, and now circulating supply is around 53 million. Why it came to it so quickly, that's another question. But there are why it came to 53 million in circulation is another question, the person says. But there are 3 channels on the MDC for mining. My question is, after the max cap is reached, will it be incentivized to have all 3 mining channels going on, and how? Staking can continue, of course, but I'm talking about the GPU and CPU miners, etc. Thanks in advance.
So if you look on GitHub source/core/release.cpp, you'll see the 3 equations, and you'll see that they degrade into an amount of 1 nexus. So the miners still have an incentive at a certain period of time. The reason it grew so fast is just the reason that we set our half-life for, I think, about 1.5 to 2 years on the production of the actual nexus. The decay minimum is after about 10 years. So that's just the economic model that I decided when I was initially designing it. Now that's up to be changed. If people think that there's some parameters that should be changed, it's not like we can't change the network. It's kind of up to everybody, but you know, we start with what we start, and if you know people like better, then we do better. But it's essentially the incentive for miners to mine is that. But then the other point is that with a 3DC, theoretically, you don't need the hashing power as much. The hashing power helps add to the weight, but that's not the end all say all. It's just another form that's verifying the other forms. So, I mean, the network could operate on T1, T2s with minimal T3 locks, or sorry, L1, L2 with minimal L3 locks, but there's always going to be a miner mining somewhere because miners need to place a mine. There's going to be a Nexus reward on it, and the stake is going to be the L2s, and then this mild amount of inflation comes from the L1s will be that with the CPU type reserve. So there's always going to be Nexus to gain and hold, and the reason for that is because it's good for an industry to always be built around the continuing growth of the economy, and if done properly and balanced and regulated mathematically, I think it can prove more benefits than drawbacks.
This one isn't about Nexus, it's about you. Where do you see yourself 3 years from now?
Where do I see myself from here? Why are they see yourself years ahead of things?
Because you think 50 years ahead of.
See, I know like the 50-year point. I'm like, all the other stuff is like, I know the final. But I mean, the next 3 years, I'm really seeing a lot of the development. Over 2018, I'm seeing a lot of the development being a lot more out of my hands, where I can concentrate more on the architecture and the guiding of people. Brian's helping a lot with that, and coding where I'm needed. But moving a lot of my production value to helping continue to build, represent, and ultimately I'd like to see my lab put back together where I can continue some of my research, especially like I've been really fascinated with quantum key distribution. So I want to figure out how to split a photon. I know, call me crazy, but it's been done. So I bet you there's ways to do it. Also continue in the hydrogen research and developing different kind of sovereign lands. So buying different land in different areas and starting to find ways to become more self-sufficient. I'd want to see at least traveling around in certain ways to be able to help certain countries that need, be speaking and spreading the word and connecting more people, building think tanks, and essentially kind of like, who is John Galt? I mean, working on continuing to bring people together to say we've had enough of this, how should I say it, old obsolete system. And I think that there's some improvements that can be made. And I think a lot of people will agree, and we can do that very peacefully. And we do it with providing value and making stuff that makes it all better and easier and incorruptible.
How do you feel as a lead developer that some of us with less technical expertise can support Nexus grow now?
Well, I mean, that's something, sorry, other parts of the team would be doing a little bit more of that. I mean, me from lead developer sense, I'd say like, I mean, hell, like you got to start somewhere. If you like follow what excites you about Nexus. I mean, if you're excited and say, oh, I've always wanted to learn to code, but I just never thought I could. Don't be your limitation for that. Do it. Like, come and say, hey, Brian, I want to help. Like, I can code a little bit of HTML. Be like, cool. We'll give you a little kitty cask and you can build up on there. Or like, if you're somebody that likes to organize people, go take that torch, find things, or help organize pods, or get in contact with a team, or to sit and make money off of hard work. It doesn't matter. But if you get excited about something, then do it and find somebody to do it. And don't feel like just because there's all this techie stuff up here that there's no way that you can contribute. Everybody, I think, contributes in their own way, even by buying and holding Nexus or buying and selling it or whatever. I mean, you're just contributing to the distribution, to helping other people get it that want it and making your profit. But I'd say do what you feel you want to do. And there's anything that can be done in it. It's not just you have to be a technical like genius in order to do it. You can do whatever you want to do as long as you follow something that excites you.
Yeah,
and
like the Nexus Hub is one way that we're setting it up so community members.
That's one way we're helping like organize it, and that's something like John David Garcia did some research. I think for 30 or 40 years, finding the most creative combination of people, and he found out that groups of 8 happened to be in the most creative combination. So with that, we're kind of starting to help organize people where you create these kind of cells, but not like you're assigned to this cell, whatever. You can just be like, oh, hey, I'm going to check this cell out. I don't vibe with these guys. I can go over to this cell. And like everybody kind of finds their place, and we can work in creative groups so that we can take advantage of exponential co-creation. But on the other side of it too, we're free to volunteer to move wherever we feel is necessary.
Okay. This question, I think, has already been asked. I just pulled all these questions out from everywhere you guys put them. So, you know, some of them are the same question twice. Economics are 50% work and should be addressed more than this. How is it not a big problem for 50 million coins to be traded among 2 exchanges only? How is it not a critical problem for a coin claiming full decentralization to have 98% of its trading volume on a centralized exchange with full compliance?
I never said it's not a problem. I think that's an assumption of people. I mean, on the record about that, I would say that it's definitely something that can be improved. Now, as far as my position, I mean, I've spent more time building stuff and designing stuff than I think reaching out to exchanges. So if you guys feel like we should be on more exchanges, then rally together, and that's a way you can get involved. That's, I think, something that the community can do a lot better than us. So, I mean, we don't claim full decentralization. We say we're always decentralizing decentralization. So we're already decentralized, but we're always moving forward to decentralize that thing. Just is, you know what I mean, you start with your centralized source of nurturance, which is your mother, and then you build out and you learn from your father, and then you make friends, and then you go to college, and then you get a job, and your life decentralizes more. That's the natural growth of certain things. So, I mean, we're still a baby right now, so we're not going to say we have all the problems solved, but I definitely don't like seeing 90% of the volume is on Bittrex, but, you know, I also like spending my time building stuff. So if you guys think that's a problem, then take it into your hands and help us decentralize it more. Because, I mean, if we're the ones that are doing all of that too, isn't that a little more centralized? So take it into our hands.
What's your take on a decentralized exchange, and is it a priority to integrate them into the Nexus equation?
Well, I mean, decentralized exchanges have their certain merits, but then they have a drawback of they're extremely slow and they're very unscalable, and it becomes very increasingly difficult to do. Now, that's something that I'm formulating and figuring out how to do properly. You know, I mean, I think atomic swaps work, but you always have the drawback of you have to trade it for Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin chain is very difficult to transfer on these days. So, I mean, that's something it's not an incredibly high priority. I'm pretty sure what's that other one? There's like Quarter or Corner or something. There's a couple decentralized exchanges that already exist. So, I mean, getting added on those would be just the same as getting added on any other centralized exchange. I think it would be up to people that want it and the demand being there and the proper connections and communication to make that happen.
I had myself on mute there. My question is regarding imposing limits on hashes. I think we already answered this one, didn't we?
We already answered that one.
Yeah. So, no, that's it for the questions. I see no other questions.
Do you have any other last minutes on the YouTube chat?
Yeah, let me see if I can pull any of them up real quick. I don't know if you got
2.5. Well, I mean, while we're here, we might as well be here. So let's take like the first 5 there or something, as long as they're not repeats.
Yeah, I can't see where they are. Let me see if I can check on the YouTube here.
Do you think you could check, Ashley? Let's see.
I got my phone too.
Of course.
We can finalize it too, whatever.
I don't want to pull it up on my computer and then have it making a whole bunch of noises.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull it up on my phone real quick, see if there's anything.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Hardware networks.
Whoop.
I'm looking on Slack too.
We got live chat. Wow. Hey, could you tell us more about that sovereign claim?
Well, I mean, it's just the simple pursuit of buying land that's kind of put in irrevocable trust. And what that'll allow us to do is kind of form our own cell-based, you know, decentralized places, kind of like you have the pods, you know, where people join together. It'd just be buying land and attempting to make it sovereign. So, I mean, not much more to say other than just working on building the proper technology and framework to make self-sustainability and more distributed based living quarters, other than just this city or that city or this town. Just make our own that allows us a little bit more freedom and choice.
Yeah, some of these questions are the same questions we already answered. Any talks of where next year's conference will be?
Well, we're definitely looking at next year's conference as probably a little more available and cheaper area. Interesting enough, I mean, the Aspen Institute was a place where there were some less than good people that built it. We ended up finding out how we could create a little more freedom and prosperity together, which was kind of a cool opposite of what other people have used it for. Oh, I actually got some questions up. So we're looking, I mean, we don't have a final, so I wouldn't say a place, but it's going to be a place that's a little more available, but we still want to maintain the quality we had of this conference because it was a very, very beautiful place. There's a lot of great people there, and we had the catering, the food. I mean, everybody was served. I mean, Ron Paul was very impressed with it. He liked it. So I think we did a really good job on this one. Next one, we're going to just try and make it a little bit better. Let's see. Tritium before or after 2018? Well, I answered it'll be when it'll be, and I'm not going to give a specific date, because if I give a specific date, then whales are going to pump it, and then they're going to dump it, and we're going to create more of the buy, rumor, sell news. So if you guys want dates, stop buying the rumors and selling the news, and we'll be able to give you dates.
Yeah, Nexus Reddit is going pretty well. Casey's knocking it out of the park with that. He's been doing good and growing our Reddit community.
To someone with limited technical knowledge. To explain it in limited 3 sentences, let's see. Connecting people around the world through innovating on finance and communication and the internet to allow us greater freedom to express ourselves in the ways that we all deserve. Okay.
Yeah, there's so many different comments on here.
Like Satoshi Forest in Florida. Yeah, Sean's Outpost. Just to comment on that, I actually used to donate to that way back in the day. Like, that's amazing that they're helping homeless people. That's one of the things I just gotta say. Like, I mean, you know, it's beautiful with crypto that we can make these new economies and we can produce a value ourselves. And I think we should all consider giving back at certain points. I mean, there's plenty of money to be made, but principle is something that lasts a lot longer than money. And character is something you take with you the rest of your life. So, I mean, the Satoshi Forest, I like seeing that because that's a really great project where they've accepted Bitcoin donations in order to help homeless people. And then they even got shut down. They tried to shut them down. They won the case finally 2 years later. But, I mean, those types of things need to happen. I mean, there's so many people out there that may have not given the proper opportunities to live the life that they've wanted or they gave up. And, you know, it never hurts to help somebody out that may need it. A lot of these are strange questions. Any advice for a young person trying to get into programming? This is from Tommy Tran. Tommy, my advice to you would be never, ever give up. Never limit yourself. You can figure any problem out. You can learn any language you want to learn. Don't think that just because you haven't learned it that you can't learn it. Do whatever you feel you can do and do something that excites you with programming. Don't get stuck in mundane things. Just always keep your mind open to learning new things, and don't ever think that you know everything, because when you do, then you stop learning. And always keep your mind open that you can learn and do anything. It's only a matter of time. There is no if in programming, there's just a when. And if somebody hasn't figured it out yet, it's because somebody said that it was not possible. But some of the greatest innovations in history have been done when people said it was not possible. So don't limit yourself. And always keep learning by keeping an open mind, and don't be arrogant. When you start thinking you know everything, you get in trouble.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I've been in contact with Elon Musk since my dad worked with him. I met him when I was a kid, and I was just like, "Hi, I'm Colin. Nice to meet you." And they're like, "Do you know who that is?" I'm like, "I don't know, some guy." And that's about the most contact I had with Elon. I grew up here, and Elon this, Elon that, and Elon this, and Elon that, and met him a couple times. And oh, it's Elon's party this week, and blah blah blah, and see all their boxes and stuff. The Small Sat conference coming in. Oh, here's SpaceX again, Elon and all his crew of tons of money and stuff. And everybody back then just laughed at him, but you know, I guess he proved him wrong in certain ways. So, you know, I mean, he seemed like a pretty decent guy, but I was kind of younger back then, so I couldn't really comment on that. But yeah, met him a couple times, and that was that.
Can you explain the project in a short, like in three bulletin points?
I just answered that question.
You did?
Yeah, you did that.
Like 4 questions ago. Where's the forum? From Nicholas Gilmore. I believe that's saying it right. Sorry if I butchered that. The forum's at nxsforum.com. Let's get community involvement on that. It'd be good. Bring it to life a little more. I'll be lurking on there and answering questions too. We'll get Brian on there. We'll get Keith. We'll get the team. So we'll be on there a lot more. And if you guys are on there a lot more, we'll have a lot more to talk about.
Are CubeSats going to mine the protocol?
Well, I'd say that they could lock transactions and they could stake, but mining on a CubeSat is a very, very inefficient action. I mean, locking transactions is essentially a form of mining without the data racing. So mining is constantly increasing the need of computing power for security. But sorry, L1 locks are going to be able to just verify a signature and make a signature, which is, it's still doing a bit of computing, but it's not a whole hell of a lot of computing. So, I mean, they can be doing those more minor computational models. But as far as the whole data race mining, I don't think it's the most efficient way to do it. I mean, the Cube satellites are going to be very useful for distributing and mapping out and creating, you know, the Arlo set and things like that for the mapping of the mesh network and also storing of the data caching. But I mean, a lot could be done on the ground as well. You know, is below, above, or above, below. You know, both need to mirror one another. And I think one of the biggest advantages of it is having global coverage, being able to access it from a cell phone, and then also on the ground being able to form a mesh network to kind of load balance the need for the satellites themselves.
There's a question. Do you depend on a government to launch the satellite? Can they?
Colin and the broadcast with playing a bit on the cello. Nah. I mean, I could. I don't know if I have enough rosin on my bow. Ashley could play some piano. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Just there's some cello at the conference. Just watch there. It's kind of a heat of the moment thing, you know, with music. You just spontaneously musically combust. That's at least how I see it.
Yeah, and it looks like we have an issue with Slack. Some people have been asking about that. I don't think that we've passed a limit. I think what it is we have too many invites sent out. So something has to be manually done by Slack itself to disperse those.
We're talking to their team right now, seeing if we can get that increased. Right now, they limit things at 5,000. We're trying to get them increased to 10,000, hopefully. I think it's a good problem to have that we have maxed out the Slack. So we're diligently working on that. We will keep you guys up to date to get that in. But until then,
we're also building Discord.
Yep. Build up Discord, build up the NXS forum, go to Reddit, go to Twitter, go to Facebook. There's a lot of other places, and I think it would be good to get it out of just Slack. I think Slack has its uses, but it's very difficult when there's so many people in there. So, I mean, let's assess some other options as well in parallel with the solutions.
Yeah, there's too many pending invites is the issue. It's not that there's too many people in there. So
yeah, it does that sometimes. Invite limit reached. There's too many. It's because there's bounced emails. They did this to us before where if there's too many bounces from Slack, they get mad.
Yeah.
The argument about rumor and news is false because you already gave a lot of deadline and missed them. I never gave a deadline. You guys should make sure that's clearly communicated. We don't give deadlines, and we stand to that before. We say we give hopeful projections, but we never said specifically it's going to be released on this day. So it's communicated. That's our apologies for that. But to just make sure that it's clarified, we don't give deadlines for that specific kind of problem. The two deadlines we've ever given were the conference deadline, for one, that was inevitable, and the white paper, which was 2, and that's where we had a bit of problem with whales pumping and dumping.
Yeah, actually with both of them.
Those are the only 2 deadlines we've ever given. So that's just that's the facts there, and I hope you guys have that clear now. Okay. I think
I just want to notify people, if you've not been staking your Nexus.
Well, thanks for asking. Sorry. Lambo Drones for FPV noobs said, thanks for answering, Colin, but the question was, will you work with Elon in the future despite family conflict? I wouldn't call it family conflict. I particularly say I don't personally agree with some of Elon's motives. I'm not going to speak negatively about him, but I have noticed that his financials are grossly dependent upon taxpayer money, which I'm not a big fan of. So from internal people I know that work there, I do not think it would be a suited environment to work with him. Now, in the future, if he came and wanted to develop some form of partnership, as long as it wasn't one of, as long as it isn't something that could be a threat to everything we do and it could benefit everybody, possibly, but I really would probably rather not. Let's see. I'm going to finish these questions and then we're done. Discord, Gossip Play, Laughs. Thanks for answering. You're welcome, Limbo Drones. This be used in Mars? Well, theoretically, yeah, but we got to get quantum telecommunication working a little better there because I think it's what 20 or 30 minutes RF to reach Mars. That would kind of not necessarily work the best, but I mean, theoretically, yeah, I mean, things get, you know, advanced in the future. I don't see how it couldn't be a possibility, but we got to get Nexus Earth figured out first, and then we'll do Nexus Mars, maybe.
Our transactions will still be faster than Bitcoins.
Oh, guys. I guess so. Instead of thinking free, why not try asking what you can contribute to value? Then that would be appreciated by community. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. It's me, boss lady. So yeah, I mean, thinking free, I think, is one thing, but I would say too that contributing value to the community is something that people determine themselves of what their value is. If we start saying your value is this and your value is this, I think it creates some issues with people and social organization. We generally like to help guide people into finding their own. And so, I mean, I think thinking free is a component of that, and producing value is another component.
All right. Well, we're running at hour 35 minutes here, so
that's good. And I'm reading people are just saying play the cello. Yeah, people. I don't even have the damn cello tune, guys. Come on.
There's some video of you playing the cello from the conference. I know I got a bunch. I still got to get it up online.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, my bow needs rosin. If you guys know what that means, it means that the bow's not very sticky. So there's a certain dead spot in the bow. So I have to really dig it in at certain parts. So, I mean, if you guys really insist to play it sometime later, but I don't think it's appropriate to do it on this live stream. Sorry. This is more so dedicated to technical and, you know, philosophical questions regarding Nexus. So I think this is about time to wrap it up. Okay. Glad to see increasing communication. We're doing our best, guys. Oh, okay. I don't understand why you don't respond to my question. I responded to, will transactions be free? Yes, they will be free. That's part of what some of the earlier questions addressed. That's going to require some updates. The Tau is probably be, I'd say we can maybe do it in Amine, maybe Tritium, we'll see. But yeah, they're definitely planning on being free. And if you send a lot of them, then you're going to have to do a little processing work too. So that way it kind of balances things out for people, and that prevents our dust spam attacks, and so on and so forth. Newsletter in October. Yes, we will. And last one. What's the story of the crystal? It's just selenite. I mean, it's a nice crystal. You can look up what it means. But or quartz or whatever. Oh, I like crystals. So, all right, everybody. I think we're good. We're good on the questions. Maybe if you guys have more suggestions, if you liked this live stream, this Q&A, I think maybe we should do it a little more often, the development Q&A. I think it's good to increase team communication. People can see us more. We can get down. And I mean, it's good for real-time team suggestions because, I mean, as always, Nexus is a community-built coin. It's always been that way, and we're always intending to keep it that way. So we represent a lot of the opinions, and we produce our value as everybody produces their value. And that's, I think, what makes a system truly in service of everybody.
Yes, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and that'll be the end of this transmission.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.